Hello, everyone. Welcome back on YouTube and LinkedIn with another exciting episode of the Top Innovator Series. This is where we dive into proven leadership ideas, game-changing strategies, and of course, the brilliant minds behind all of that. My name is Josef Martens. I'm your host, and with us today is Jason Wilcox. Jason is the CTO with Source Advisors, a global tax consulting firm. Before that, he's been CTO, head of technology, and director of technology with several other financial services companies. And he's also the publisher of the Your Tech Suite newsletter that helps small and medium-sized businesses level up their technology. And today, we're thrilled to have Jason with us. Jason, it's great to have you here.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Joseph. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Love to take a look at your leadership journey. You're clearly highly successful and accomplished in your journey. When you reflect on your own journey, what would you attribute your success to? What do you think are some of the ingredients that got you to where you are today?
I think when it comes to leadership and being successful at it, it's everything I didn't want to do when I went to school to be an engineer, right? So, you know, I'm naturally just inclined to engineering, and I love being tactical. I love getting my hands dirty and doing all those things. But the benefit then was, okay, I don't have to do all the communication stuff and all the
Okay.
leadership stuff and the
Mhm.
management stuff, but yeah, clearly that didn't work out. So the engineering aspect is still great. I still love to get involved, but yeah, just I think coming to a realization that I really had to level up my communication style. I
Okay.
had to level up how I interact with people, how I think about the other side of
Mhm.
of what people's needs are, what the team's needs are, and really thinking about, there's truth in the idea of when you have a strong leader, a strong manager, someone in that realm, they can really level up everyone else, and
Mm.
then you can get, the gains in velocity, you can get the gains in just how a team or an organization operates, and coming to that realization that, hey, I might have something to offer in that aspect.
Got it. So you said it's all the things that you didn't initially enjoy. Tell me more about what was surprising for you in your early stages as a leader. What were some of the things that were totally different from what you expected?
Yeah, going to school for biomedical engineering, one of the great aspects of going to Marquette was I didn't have to take humanities courses. I didn't have to take all these other items. I was like, great, I can just do
Uh-huh.
engineering work. And then getting into your work field and everyday life and having a full-time job, I think most people probably learn this, or at least they should, and it's something I certainly learned of. You very quickly get into aspects where maybe you're not titled as a manager, you're not
Mm,
titled as a leader, but now you're leading a project, or you have to take, a leadership role in
yeah.
something that is trying to get done, right? And it can be very small and it can get very big. But all of those skills, the communication
Yeah.
skills, the leadership skills, the management skills, they translate. And so I think very early on, I just kind of figured out like, oh, this is something that's going to be a part of it,
Mm,
right? Whether I am a junior developer, whether I'm a
mhm.
software engineer, whether I'm a lead engineer. No, there's going to be communication with a lot of different stakeholders. There's going to be managing just how people operate with a project,
Mhm.
with a function, a feature, all those aspects. And it's not just sitting down 40 hours a week and
Yeah.
building code or building something. That's just not most jobs.
Yeah.
And so from there, and then I will say also, thankfully, my wife, her background is communication and leadership and management. And so she was a huge benefit to not only realizing I have to build these skills, okay, but how do I build these skills? Because
Mm,
learning to develop in a new language or being an engineer comes natural, but communication and collaboration, those don't come as natural.
mhm.
And now being 20 years into it, they are much more natural. It comes out much more easily. But when I started down this journey, it was tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine. So it sounds like there's a bit of a shift. Initially, the way you describe it is there is an avoidance of the communication, the people topic, and you could focus on just the technology and engineering. And now you're fully in that world of the people skills.
Yeah,
Um, do you
absolutely.
do you still get a sense of wanting to avoid it, or have you completely shifted into embracing it and saying, "This is the world of a leader. I love it. That's my world now." Tell me where you
Yeah,
are in
I
that shift.
that's a good question. I think at this point I'm fully bought in. I
Hmm.
think a lot of those tendencies of just going off and doing something technical, it's not that they're dead, but I know that there's a time and place for them. And I look at the software and the things that get built now, and it's so different than when I was a junior engineer just coming out of college. Back then you had requirements documents and you were trying to figure out how to do things. Now, especially with software, a lot of the stuff of how to has been figured out. And it's really now about how do you provide a better user experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's all the mousetraps, I think for the most part, people really understand. But how are you going to build something that is just magical for the people who are going to be using it? And I think a lot of us in software development, especially, or IT, data engineering, we have had to develop a much more collaborative nature to work with the stakeholders that we have because they have grand ideas. And some of these ideas are really awesome, but it takes way more than a requirements document to understand how do we make that idea tangible and make it something that people want to use. And
Mm-hmm.
so the way that we approach our IT tickets, the way that we approach data engineering, the way that we approach software development is now entirely from that user experience, right? Like we need
Yeah.
developers, we have to build these things, but user experience is such a huge driver in everything that I do in all aspects of
Yeah.
technology now.
Yeah, I get it. So the focus on people is much more present in the product development
Absolutely.
as well. Yeah, which may not have been the case to that extent before. Let me take another look at your leadership journey from a different perspective.
Sure.
What was some of the advice that you got from mentors? We all have our trusted advisors, mentors, people who are part of our journey. What were some of the nuggets they shared with you? Maybe even something where you thought initially, this makes no sense, right? This will never. And at a later point, you might have realized there was wisdom to that.
I'll say my first job out of college was with Marquette Medical, which was bought by GE Healthcare. And so there, I was a biomedical engineer. I'm working with a bunch of other biomedical engineers. We're all call it classically trained, right? We all
Mm-hmm.
have degrees. We all doing all that. And I left there for a time and actually went and worked in the oil field, oddly enough. And I worked with such a diverse group of people from all walks of life who were coming together to get really ambitious things done, right? Whether it was a barge that went down in the Gulf or it was cleaning up an oil spill or
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I think it pulled me out of the world of just kind of having very tunnel vision about
Mm-hmm.
I'm an engineer, I work with other engineers, and this is how we're going to get stuff done, to really more of thinking about, oh no, it takes all sorts of different skill sets and competencies. And I think when I came back, uh, and just working as an engineer and then continuing to grow, starting my own company, and just thinking about, oh, this is a huge amount of difference as far as the people that are going to be involved, the needs, and all those aspects. And my guess is you can probably hear that lawnmower.
I can't
Oh, okay, perfect. All
can't
right.
hear it.
Well, then we're good. But yeah, so I noticed the window was open and
Yeah.
there you go. But that's one of the biggest things. I was working with a good family friend who owned a salvage company, gave me that opportunity. And that was something that he never explicitly said, like, you need to find people that are diverse, but all have core drivers of like wanting to get stuff done, right? The GSD
Mm.
person.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the biggest takeaways that I think that I've had and continue to develop is I have known people who are incredibly smart and well credentialed, and they don't get things done,
Mm.
right? Like they go through the motions, you know that they're intelligent, but they don't have that drive. They don't have that sense of ownership. And that's something that, as I've worked
Yep.
through with companies like Jerry and LCS and RefiJet and Source, is when I have the best success, it is those people that really want to take ownership. They want to get things done. And that comes from that. I feel like I always had a little bit of get stuff done mentality, but that was definitely one of the biggest takeaways from working in the oil field is people are there to get stuff done.
Yep.
There's no one out on a rig, there's no one out on a job who they're not a cog in a wheel, right? Like
Yep.
they're there to get stuff done.
Yep. I get it. Really important skill to have, right? Or attitude, being willing to take
Yeah.
ownership, stepping into full accountability and not coming up with excuses, but owning whatever the result is. Is your experience that this is something that can be taught or trained or learned? Or do people come with it and have it or don't?
Yeah, that's a great question. I've thought about that
Mm,
a lot over the years because, when I think about just hiring someone in general, you tend to look at, okay, skill sets,
mm,
attributes, personality types, and certain things like if you find a really good developer and you want to bring them into a different language or a different framework, something that's very teachable. I do tend to find that I think approaches, I don't know what you'd call it, right? Like a mentality.
yeah.
It's not that it can be taught, but I think it can be cultivated. I
Hmm.
think that there are people that
Mhm.
um, they might have a desire, maybe they have a high sense of ownership or they have a high sense of integrity or other
Mhm.
aspects that
Yep.
can be really important to the professional environment. I think people go through certain ebbs and flows, almost like a sine wave, right? As they kind of go through life, where they can get into places where they're kind of in that valley. But you can cultivate people back to that high point of really
Hmm.
having that drive and that need. I think part of it is having interesting problems to solve. I think problem part of it is having environments that are receptive to it. If you're a company or you're a leader where you expect perfection or you're driving towards the bottom line all the time,
Mhm.
it doesn't necessarily foster that sense of ownership, that sense of getting
Yeah.
stuff done. You might drive people to do things, but it's an explicit or it's like an extrinsic factor and not an intrinsic factor that's pushing them to it. And
Yeah.
I think when you have that intrinsic piece, and if you're able to cultivate that, that's a much better driver.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. If it's not driven by incentives or anything external, much
Yeah.
stronger if it comes from inside. Yeah. Now, we talked about your past leadership journey. Let me take a look at today, where you are in your journey today. And this is not about titles, companies, or anything like that. It's still about leadership journey. When you look at where you are today, what are some areas that you are focusing on in your own growth, your own development, what you feel needs attention right now?
That's a great question. I would say, right now I have the privilege of working with some amazing
Hmm.
people and working globally. I have
Hmm.
people in India, in the EU, in America, in all sorts of places around the globe. And this is only going to grow. Leaders who want to be good at their job and want to continue to develop as leaders, they need to understand that as they get bigger, they're going to have a global presence, right? They're going to have that.
Yep.
Um, but that cultures are different, mentalities are different. However, they're also evolving. And I just had a conversation about this recently of I've now had the privilege for probably the last decade of having team members in India. And the way that you approach your global team members really needs to evolve, because I think what happens is, and I found this with myself, of I have a hat I had a habit of almost like pigeonholing, like, okay, this area does really well at this, and this area does really well at this, or I can get really good costs here, but I know I have to accommodate it here. And what I found with my team in India, for example, is that there is a cultural revolution about how they approach engineering and IT and software. And that's something that I need to be more open to. And I think leaders in
Mm,
general need to be more open to. Of we gain huge amounts of experience, right? We've been doing this 20, 25,
mm,
30 years. But the way things happened 20 years ago for me have evolved. And I have to keep that in mind for everyone in my team as well, right? They're in their own evolution journey that is not only just them,
mhm,
but it can be cultural, it can be
mhm.
geographical, it can be spiritual, it can be all these different
Yeah,
things. And so I think, that's something that I continue to work on, is making sure that I continually reevaluate and reassess the pros and cons, the strengths and weaknesses of different people that I'm working with and different projects that I'm working with, and knowing that, just because a team operated this
yep,
way 10 years ago or 15 years ago,
mhm,
well, that's changing, right? Those countries are changing,
yep,
technology is changing all across the globe. And there's just an opportunity to really continue to grow and evolve with those different groups and those different cultures, and build like just amazing things. And people, wherever they are just getting better and better at technology and communication and collaboration. And it's going to continue to go that way.
yep, yep. So what I hear there, a lot of organizations, a lot of tech leaders have experience with working with an outsourced other country. In many cases, many have that experience. And what I hear you say is that maybe that's taken too transactional sometimes, and it's worth focusing more on the relationships, the cultures, and the growth that comes from that, from being with another culture. Did I?
Yeah, I think that's a
Mm,
great way to put it.
okay.
I like the use of the word transactional. Yes, it
Mm,
is. uh, You know, you've worked in
yeah.
technology, you know that relationships can be very powerful. And I think that with some vendors, you get into that transactional
Yes.
relationship, and sometimes with contractors, third parties, you can think about it
Hmm.
as a transaction. But there is, I think, a much more diverse and
Hmm.
dynamic relationship that can be very powerful.
I like that. That's nice, right? It's always the call to see if there's a way to level up the relationship. When I think of a hierarchy of relationship, transactional things are fairly low. It's like calling a
Yeah,
help desk, right?
yeah,
But we can
yeah,
level up the relationship and see if there is more possible, up to being a trusted advisor maybe in some issues. Hmm. Nice.
yeah,
Let me take a look into the future now. And Jason, I know the future is always uncertain and the crystal balls that we have are very murky. But
yeah.
nonetheless, let's speculate. If we had this conversation in 3 years, 5 years, something like that, what do you think might change or might have changed about your leadership then? And again, not products, right? Leadership. What do you think might be
Yeah.
different?
I That's a good question. When you look at technology and products, right, with AI and all those things, it's changing super fast.
Hmm.
I When it comes to leadership, I mean, one, I hope that I continue to get better at it, that
Hmm.
I can continue to provide a service to the people under my leadership, to the teams that I'm driving. But I don't know that there's going to be a huge evolution. Maybe that's not what
Okay.
people want to hear, but the fact of the matter is, the core of leadership is people working with other people. And so AI and technology, these all change, but people don't, right? People, they want a good job. People want a good place to work. People want time off to spend with their family and friends, and that doesn't really change. And so I think I'll certainly have some growth, and I hope that I continue to grow just on my journey as being a
Yeah.
leader. But I think the bigger piece of it, I don't know that evolves all that much. My guess is based on just where I am in my journey, as my team sizes increase and my responsibilities increase, I'm probably going to get to do less and less tactical work, which, for me, it's a little sad. You got to have those nighttime hobbies then of building or tinkering and whatnot. But yeah, I think from a leadership standpoint, certainly, it, yeah, like I said, I don't know if
Okay.
there's an evolution
Yep.
so much as it's a skill that I just need to continue getting
Okay.
better at.
Yep. Perfect. Let me ask you one last question, Jason, and then we'll wrap it up. If you were to sum up your leadership philosophy or leadership mantra in a short, maybe even one sentence or a short statement, is this something that you can do? Is there sort of a sound bitey type of statement that you could say that's Jason's leadership?
Uh, is it my, I don't know if I'd say it's my leadership, but if
Okay.
I had a soundbite, it would be manage expectations. The best leaders manage expectations, right? Whether it is you are leading a team
Hmm.
and you're setting expectations around milestones, dates, timelines, that sort of thing. You're managing other leaders that you work with and you're managing their expectations around what a team can deliver or what a service can provide, something like that. If you are able to manage expectations and continuously communicate those, um, you'll knock out 80% of your problems. I don't care, regardless of where you are. Manage
I
expectations.
like it. I like it. And that assumes, of course, you need to know something about the other person, right? About their expectation.
Absolutely,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, because it's going to be, when you are managing expectations, it's you're managing expectations for every
Yep.
individual, right,
Yep.
within whatever you're doing. So whether it
Mm-hmm.
is, again, a team where you have individual people and they operate at different capacities and velocities, or if you have a group of other leaders and they're looking at all the different things they're trying to do and
Mm-hmm.
what that looks like, and just understanding what is their point of view, what's driving them, do they have expectations set upon them that you're now a dependency. But it manage expectation requires the collaboration, the communication, and that constant
Yep.
interaction feedback.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having here, and many thoughts will stick with me, especially the one where you talked about growing in a global context and finding different ways to elevate the relationships that we have there. Thank you so much for that,
Yeah, no,
Jason.
Joseph, I appreciate you having me. This has been awesome. You've got a great podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it. To everyone else out there, remember to like, subscribe, share, and comment on our videos. And most importantly, join us again for the next episode of the Top Innovator Series. And until then, make sure to keep your brain cells active.